On this episode of Building Men, life lessons learned from strangers. Welcome to the Building Men podcast. I'm your host, Dennis Meralda. Building Men is geared toward helping you become the strongest version of yourself. Mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically. What is up, everyone? My name is Dennis Meralda, and I am the host of the Building Men podcast. This is episode 36, and today I'm going to talk to you about life lessons that I've learned over the course of my 44 plus years from total strangers at the time. Over the last 7 weeks, I've been running this program. I called it the Rebuild program. It was a 12-week, or it was designed as a 12-week program for men. And I published it on Instagram, or I talked about it on Instagram, and I did a podcast about it one day, just explaining what it was going to be about. Wasn't quite sure about it, but so I started this Rebuild program, and each week there was a specific topic that we would talk about. So I would release one video a week. There would be some type of a downloadable resource or survey. And then there was usually a weekly challenge that people had to go through. It was like a weekly thing that people had to do and then post about it in a group page. And there was like this level of accountability. And so week 1 was about mindset. Week 2 was about accountability. Week 3 was, I think it was intentional discomfort. We were talking about the idea of buffering, which I covered on in a previous podcast. We talked about mentors and coaches. So in the week about intentional discomfort, there was also this kind of challenge, like to put yourself in this uncomfortable situation. And I got his permission to do this. So my brother, Anthony, who was on 1 or 2 previous podcasts, and I'm going to have him on in some future podcasts, and I'll talk a little bit about the future Building Men at the end of this episode, so make sure you stick around for that. So anyway, my brother's part of this Rebuild program. I kind of asked him to audit the class just to see what it was like. But he's also, I think, getting a lot out of it. And the other cool thing that has come from this is this really cool community feel that has come along with it. So people are posting on a regular basis. We've developed connections with each other, and people are helping each other out, which has been so cool for me to see and for me to witness that this group of men have come together in this really positive way. It's been one of my goals in life is to help people become better and to help themselves. And so this has been such an awesome experience for me to see that happen right in front of my face. So my brother, talking about intentional discomfort, I asked people to do something that would put them outside of their comfort zone, and let the group hold you accountable for it. It could be anything. It could be, there's 2 members of the group that they're trying to get books published. And so their thing is they need to write every single week. So or every single day. So part of their accountability is writing 750 words every single day. There are some people, maybe it's training and they need to get a little bit outside of their comfort zone with pushing themselves physically. Some people it's meditation. Some people it's more like a social kind of thing that they're trying to put themselves outside of their comfort zone. Some people are taking cold showers every day. There's all these different things depending on the person in the group, and really wanted to try to differentiate based on the needs of the people that were in the program. So anyway, Anthony chose his intentional discomfort piece was to meet someone new every single day. My brother has always struggled with kind of a social anxiety. You would never believe this when you meet him and you talk to him face to face. He's this really good looking guy. He's in unbelievable shape. He's really demonstrative, really engaging person. But when it's in a social setting with more than 1 or 2 people, especially people that he doesn't know, he gets really anxious. We're almost to a point where, he's already passed out in social situations back when he was in school. So it's something that he really struggles with. So the thing that he wanted to do was every day he wanted to meet a new person. That was his goal that he set for himself, and he wanted us to hold him accountable, was every day he wanted to meet and talk to someone new, a total stranger, and to have the confidence to go up to a new person and just introduce himself or ask a question. And what he realized, which I thought was so cool, was that every single person has a story. Every single person has this individual story that there is the collective experiences that they've had in their own life that none of us have had. And unless you could invest 1 minute in a person that you don't know and someone that you meet in line at a grocery store, or that you are at a ball game with your kids, or whatever the case may be. Just someone new that maybe you just ask someone how their day is going, or, strike up a conversation. You might learn something about this person that you never knew before that might impact you in a really powerful and meaningful way. It's just being comfortable with having, that second to invest in another person. And you never know, those seconds that you spend investing in another person might really come back in a really positive way for you one day as well. So I started to think about maybe lessons that I have learned in my life from strangers, or at the time they weren't people that I knew, that these life lessons went on to have a major impact in my life. And I started to think, okay, the first life lesson that I learned was, I was probably a student in middle school, but then again, it came back and it taught me it as a middle school principal. And there was a woman who worked at Stoke State Forest in northern New Jersey, and it was at the climbing tower. I definitely talked about the climbing tower in previous episodes of Building Men. It was a really impactful moment, and I was someone who was scared of heights. But I remember as a student, Anne was the lady who ran the climbing tower. So we would go and she would set up the harness, and we would have to belay and try to get up to the top of this climbing tower. And one thing that she said to the students, I remember as a student, she would, as we were climbing up the wall, some kids would zip right to the top of it, no issues. The other kids, like myself, were struggling, and it was just, I was, my palms were sweating. I thought I was going to fall and die, or I was just scared of heights. And it was just something that was really pervasive fear that I had. And I still remember her saying, go one step further than you thought you can go. And so I would think about it, and I could do this. So I would go one step further, maybe climb one rung higher. And once I got there, she's like, you did it. Now go one step further than you thought you can go. And I thought that that's as far as I can go. And just that idea of like going just a little bit further than I thought I can go. And before I knew it, I was at the top of the climbing wall. And I can still remember the feeling that I had of conquering that fear by going a step further than I thought I could go. And this woman I had never met before. And as it turns out, as a principal, as I went back and I brought my own middle school students to the same place, and she was still there at the climbing tower. And she was still telling students the same exact thing. Go a step further than you thought you can go. Go a step further than you thought you could go. And that's just a life lesson I've always tried to carry with me. It's something that I try to even say to my kids, and I try to say to people that I work with on a coaching basis, people that are trying to limit themselves with whatever is in front of them. Just go a little bit further than you thought you can go. Go that one step further than you thought you can go. And once you're there, you can look back and say, I just did that. I went further than I thought I can go. And you know what? I could take another step. There's a quote by Martin Luther King. If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. I just love that quote by MLK, and I think it really fits in this situation, going a step further than you thought you can go. When we put a hard limit on something that we can do, we can't really learn or achieve from it. But when we have that idea, like I can go a step further, I can go a step further. Think about the things that you can achieve, you can learn, you can experience, those things in your life that now are possible because you don't have that limiting belief, that you have more of a growth mindset, an abundant mindset. So that was first life lesson that I learned from a stranger. Second life lesson happened as I was getting ready to leave my position as a principal. And I actually had a virtual meeting with someone. It was like a webinar, and I was, talking with someone on this webinar. His name was Taylor, and he actually worked for TED Talks, and he was talking to me about, a message that I might have to, maybe be on a TED Talk one day. And the thing that he said to me was, he said, take the leap and the net will appear. Put the car in drive and the map will appear. And so his thing to me, and this is someone that I never met before, he was a total stranger to me, but his message, or the life lesson I learned from this guy, Taylor, I wish I remember his last name, was that, you need to, it's great to have confidence, it's great to have belief, it's great to have that mindset, it's great to have a plan in place, but change happens when action comes. Change happens when that action comes first. It's great to have that great mindset and these plans, and you could, journal about it and write what you need to do, but you have to start moving first. Once you start moving, I really believe that kind of momentum can carry us. And so I think back to even the idea of starting the podcast. I remember the first podcast episode that I did, and it was back in July of 2020. And I remember sitting in front of the microphone and my palms were sweaty and I was so even afraid to hit record, and I had everything scripted out in front of me, everything that I was going to say. I even made little notes to myself, like, okay, pause here, maybe add a funny comment here. And it definitely sounds a lot more robotic than it does now. I don't script these anymore, but I remember what I need to do is just hit record. You gotta take the leap, the net's gonna appear. You gotta put the car in drive, and the map's going to appear. So you need to take that action, whatever it is. So when there's something that might be limiting you, it kind of goes back to that last thing, go a step further than you thought you can go, but you have to take the action. You have to start moving first. I really believe that action comes first, and then it's like, okay, I get why this is working now. And then all of a sudden you start finding success, and it helps you take the next step and the next step. When I was deciding whether or not I should run that rebuild program I mentioned before, there were two guys that really helped me out. It was Austin Linney. Austin Linney does a podcast called Construct Your Life, and the other guy's name is Luke Mace. And Luke Mace, you can definitely find him on Instagram. He does, I think his website is The Home of Growth. And he's an entrepreneur and a businessman. And these are two men that just reached out to me as they were seeing what I was doing on Instagram, just to touch base and say what's up. And I shared with them the ideas that I had for building men for the future. And both of them were really instrumental in helping me find the confidence within myself to take that risk, to take that step, to move forward, to take the leap and then wait for the net to appear. And they're both like, Austin's, message to me was like, listen, you got to basically shit or get off the pot. You got to, you can't sit there and think and think and think. You have to do. You have to do it, and then you'll start to see the results from it, and you'll gain the confidence by starting, but you have to start. And Luke's message to me was, listen, whatever you do, it's better than doing nothing. He said, and his quote was, put out your shit version first. Put out that shit version of whatever you're doing, and then you learn from it, you get better at it, and then the next version will be better, and then the next version will be better. So both of those things that they helped me with goes back to that meeting this stranger that said, take the leap and the net will appear, put that car in drive and the map will appear. That was the second lesson that I learned from a complete stranger. The third lesson that I learned from a complete stranger, who is now not a complete stranger. So I met Julie. I talked about Julie in previous episodes. Julie Verona is my girlfriend, and Julie was someone who I met back in August. And one of the first conversations that we ever had before we even knew each other, we just talked about our journeys in life. And one thing that she told me was, she said, find your light at all costs. And then the other message was, full force forward and don't look back. And that was a message that her father, Bill, taught her. And then that goes back to her upbringing and things about her childhood. But basically it was this idea that even if you don't feel like you have that spark inside of you anymore, that maybe you feel like you're lost, or maybe you feel like, you're cold and dead inside and there's nothing in you anymore. You just don't have that drive anymore. There's still these little embers that might be the inside that are just need to be stoked a little bit. And I think finding that light is a really deep look inside, and really an introspective kind of journey inside of yourself, and taking a hard look inside, but understanding that you have it in you, that light is in you right now. I mean, obviously there are people along the way. There are mentors, there are coaches, there are family members, there are friends, there are people that you're in relationships that will help you find that light. But it's up to us individually, to look inside and to recognize the strength and the power that we have inside. So maybe it's those few embers that are there that they need a little bit of stoking, but they're there, goddammit. And what you need to do is look inside and find them. Even the darkest spots, like a little bit of light can illuminate a dark area. And that's all you need, is that little bit of light. And then once you find it, you got to go full force forward. You can't back down to anything. And the idea of don't look back, the Boston song, Don't Look Back, that became one of my mantras over the past year of my life. You're not your past. You might have made mistakes in your past. You might have done things that you regret. You might have done things that you're not proud of. You might not have always been the best person, but you have this chance right now, as you're listening to this podcast at this very moment, you get to make a choice. You get to make a choice to kind of wallow in that, oh, I did this or I did that, or life has not been fair to me, or, it hasn't been kind. Or you can say, you know what, I'm not going to look back. I'm going to take this moment right here and keep moving forward. Full force forward. Don't look back. Maya Angelou said, nothing can dim the light that shines from within. So that was a third life lesson that I learned from a stranger who was a stranger at the time. Commit to being your best self, and once you do, don't half-ass it. Keep that momentum going. The positive steps, when they're taken in the right direction every single day, they'll really help you find that light and help you move full force forward. The next lesson that I learned from a stranger, I did a whole podcast about this. His name was Kyle, and Kyle was a homeless gentleman who I would pass on a regular basis as I was spending time between my brother's house in Pennsylvania and my house where my kids were. As I was in the process of going through divorce and selling my house, I was, living half the time with my brother and half the time at home as we were selling the house. And I would pass Kyle and a couple other gentlemen in Trenton, New Jersey. And, there were times that I just drove right past them and didn't even make eye contact with them. There were some times that I might have rolled down my window and given a buck or two. And there was this time that I was driving and I saw someone in front of me just throw something out the window at them. It turned out to be threw a couple of French fries at this guy. And the part of me wanted to stop, speed up and go beat the shit out of the guy who did that. But I pulled over to the side of the road and I went and I started talking to Kyle. And the life lesson that he taught me was, he just said, thank you for acknowledging me. Thank you for looking at me. He said, so many people drive by and won't even make eye contact with me. He said, obviously, I'm ashamed being out here and having to ask people for help and ask people for money. But just the fact that you stopped and came out and talked to me, but more than that, you looked at me. You acknowledged me as another human being who's living on this earth that's breathing the same air that you're breathing. And that made such a profound impact on me because I started to think, how many times have I walked down the street and saw someone who was less fortunate and I didn't do anything to help them, and I just kind of looked in the opposite direction because maybe it made me uncomfortable to see them in that state, or maybe I'd have to reach into my pocket and give them $1 for my wallet or something like that, and it was about me being uncomfortable. And imagine how they must have felt. So that was a life lesson I learned from Kyle. And so I'll spin the story in another direction. I recently connected with a gentleman. His name is Tomas. He runs the Instagram page Masculinity Movement. And Tomas is from Ireland. And Tomas is someone who I've learned a great deal from. He's a young gentleman who has such a mature and interesting and authentic view of masculinity in the world. And he's someone that I try to connect with on a regular basis now. And Tomas, we've collaborated on a couple things, but he told me a story about his teenage years when he was in high school. And he was about to get onto a bus, and a gentleman tapped him on the shoulder. And Tomas turns around, and the gentleman was obviously homeless. And the man gave Tomas back his wallet. And so Tomas, looked at the guy who was obviously homeless. He thanked him. And the guy said, can you pay for me to ride the bus? And Tomas said, absolutely, I'd be happy to pay for you to ride this bus. And Tomas was astounded that the man did not take his wallet and run. He said he had, a substantial amount of money in his wallet. The guy could have taken it and Tomas would have never known, but he tapped him on the shoulder and gave him back his wallet. So Tomas gave him a couple bucks and he paid for his bus fare and sat with him on the bus. More importantly, he sat with him on the bus and he talked to this man about his journey. And Tomas was basically saying, I feel sorry for you. And the man said, I'm a homeless man in Ireland. He said, this is so much better than where I was from. He said, I was homeless in Iraq. And he said, I didn't think I was going to live every day. It was such a dangerous situation that for me, being able to get out of that country and be in Ireland, I'm so thankful to be here because at least I'm homeless in a country that's not the country where I was from, that I could have it was so dangerous for me. It was life or death situation every single day. And so Tomas started to think about this, and the conversation I just had with him today was about the idea of gratitude and what we take for granted in life, and the idea that, this man was grateful to be homeless in Ireland rather than being homeless in Iraq. And so we think about, the things that we are really, worried about in our life. It might be if people are homeless, they're like, oh, I wish I could just make minimum wage. And people that make minimum wage are like, oh, I wish I could just be, part of the working class. And the working class wants to be part of the middle class. The middle class wants to be rich, and the rich want to be richer and richer. And where does it end? And so this idea of just being able to appreciate, I'm not advocating not trying to be your best version of yourself and continue to move forward and strive for greatness and great things. But take a step back and recognize the things that we have at our disposal. I mean, you're listening to this podcast, you're either driving in a car, you're listening on a phone or something like that. We have a lot of these great amenities at our fingertips. People are grateful to be a homeless person in Ireland rather than Iraq. So it just to help me kind of understand that idea of, gratitude and things that we take for granted and things that we should be grateful for on a regular basis. And maybe just take an opportunity just to tell those people in your life, hey, I'm grateful for you. Thank you for whatever you do for me. It's never a bad idea to show someone some level of gratitude. And I would actually challenge you every day just to express some type of appreciation towards another human being. So that was the fourth life lesson I learned from a stranger. It started with Kyle, just appreciating me, acknowledging his existence, just, the fact that I looked at him and made eye contact with him and then spoke to him, and then Tomas's journey and that whole experience. That was really a life lesson as well, speaking to Tomas about that. The final life lesson that I learned was recently. I was flying back from Florida, and I was in an airport bar. And so I was sitting next to, there was a woman, her name was Bambi, and Bambi was actually a pilot. And so Bambi was at this airport bar, and she was basically talking about, what the flight was going to be like and if there was going to be turbulence. And Bambi's comment wasn't meant to be a life lesson. It was basically, she said, once you get up to 40,000 feet, everything's going to be okay. You just have to kind of hold on until you get to 40,000 feet. And it was such a profound statement. I don't think she meant it as a profound statement. I think it was more just a factual statement that you just have to kind of hold on, deal with the turbulence. And then once you're able to get above the clouds, things are going to get a little bit better. But I took it as this deep moment where I was like, what a profound statement, Bambi. Think about the journey that we have collectively in our lives as we're trying to go through whatever we're going through, and the turbulence that you might have to endure. And that turbulence is going to shake you. It's going to scare the shit out of you. I know on a plane when there's turbulence, you get that feeling where you don't know if you're going to be able, if the plane is going down or you're going to survive. But once you can kind of battle through that turbulence in your life and get through it, when you're up there at 40,000 feet, there's definitely a different perspective that you have when you're looking down on those clouds beneath you, understanding, shit, I just got through that turbulence and now there are blue skies and I'm above it. And there's this kind of calmness and this, level of serenity that you feel when you're up above the clouds like that. And you can also appreciate all those trials and tribulations that you've gone to get you into that position. So I'm looking at it as this idea of like, wow, I got through this turbulence and now I'm in this spot where I can take a deep breath and appreciate what I've just been through and understand that I can do hard things. I can get through difficult situations. There are going to be storms. There's going to be difficult situations ahead of us. But behind all those storms, there's going to be blue skies. The sun is going to rise again tomorrow. You just have to believe it. You have to understand it. You have to be patient. And then you have to appreciate when you're looking up at those blue skies. So those were the life lessons that I learned from people that were complete strangers at the time that they taught me that life lesson. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to look for those beautiful conversations with people, to learn something new every day from someone. Every single person out there has their story. You have to be willing to to look for those stories and listen to people and understand people's journeys. And maybe you have something that you can contribute. Maybe there's a life lesson that you have that you can impart that knowledge, that wisdom onto someone else, that maybe that will help someone else breathe a little bit easier because of something that you have gone through in your own life. I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that I had some big news about the future of Building Men. So I'm going to continue to release one podcast every single week for the remainder of kind of my calendar year. So Building Men started on July 1st of 2020. And my goal that I set for myself was to get 52 episodes recorded in that first year. Like I mentioned, this is episode number 36. So I gotta get 16 episodes done in the next couple months. So that is my promise to everyone, that I will complete my journey of getting 52 episodes done in a year. So I'm going to release one podcast every week until July 1st. The other thing that's going to happen is I'm starting up kind of a second chapter of Building Men. I'm going to be working with my younger brother, Anthony, who I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast. My new friend, Sean Nixon, who, if you don't know him, he is part of the Infinity Project. If you don't know the Infinity Project, check it out on Instagram. And finally, Greg Lewis, who works with my brother at the private school in Soulbury. And Greg is just this unbelievable human being who I had the pleasure of meeting recently. So Building Men, there's also going to be a second podcast that we'll be doing every week, probably starting in May. And we're also going to be putting that up on YouTube. And it will be and that second podcast that we'll do every week will be a forum, kind of like a gentleman's discussion that we'll have every single week that we will upload to YouTube. It'll be on Instagram, and we'll also put it out as a podcast on all the ways that you can consume a podcast. And we'll be talking about everything around the idea of masculinity and perseverance and responsibility, anything you could possibly imagine that has to do with the Building Men program. These will be topics that we'll be discussing, and I'll be asking them for their unique perspectives. Each one of us has a very unique journey to be able to come to the point that we were able to connect and collaborate. So that's going to be how we'll be forming the second kind of component of Building Men moving forward. I'm really excited about it. So keep your eyes open for that next component to Building Men. So I'll do my solo podcasts once a week, and there'll be a second podcast that I'll be releasing. It'll be more of like a forum discussion with these three other men that I've had the pleasure to deal with on a more professional level recently. That is what I have for you today on Building Men. 5 life lessons that I have learned from strangers. Follow me on Instagram, building.men. Facebook is Building Med Podcast. You can email me, buildingmencoach@gmail.com. Again, I just wanted to express my gratitude to everyone out there who has listened to this podcast, who has followed me on Instagram and on Facebook, has reached out to me, has shared their personal stories, has connected to me. It makes me realize that what I'm doing is what I should be doing. And it was worth going a step further than I thought I could go. It was worth kind of taking that leap and really praying that net was going to appear. And as I record this podcast, I'm just eternally grateful and humble to everyone who has joined me on this journey and continues to follow me along on this path. I promise to keep putting podcasts out there and doing everything I possibly can do to help anyone out there who needs help in any way. So thanks for listening, and I will see you next time on Building Men.